Mark Greenway, a seasoned veteran sales leader with 25 years experience in the game. 16 years of those were at Adobe, contributing 200 million as a quota.
Once you're in sales and carrying a quota, you must initiate everything.
Become the CRO at Crownpeak, the long tenured career in leading high performance teams. What's your take on facing sellers every day? And
anyone who really confidently makes predictions at the moment is really brave. An individual contributor in sales to building a team, managing a team. It wasn't something you did one day to the next. It was a process.
And now we're seeing that second cycle, which is the AI revolution.
Automated sequences is not the way to go. In fact, I think it's actually a...
Hello, and welcome back to Season 2 of Funnel Vision, where we bring the most renowned sales leaders in EMEA to come on the show to talk about high-performance strategies that are being used across the sales sphere to deliver performance results, and also looking at the role AI is playing in transforming the way that sales teams works. I'm here today with Mark Greenway, a seasoned veteran sales leader with 25 years experience in the game. 16 years of those were at Adobe, where he led the Adobe Sign business, contributing 200 million as a quota, which is quite outstanding in of itself, and also having become the CRO at Crownpeak, the long tenured career in leading high performance teams across EMEA. Mark, it's great to have you on the show today.
Thanks, Leo. I appreciate the invitation.
Great. And I'd always like to start with early years and ultimately what led you into sales. Now, as we know, sales isn't necessarily a pathway that you decide from the outset. For many, it's one that you stumble into. I know for yourself, you've had quite a good educational background. Even before the show, we talked about the PhD that you kicked off at Imperial, and before that, the bachelor's. I'm curious to learn more about your background and ultimately what you led you into that first role in sales and ultimately the transition from there onwards.
Yeah, thanks. I think it's a great topic because, as you say, so many people find themselves in sales and find, that they can do it and they're great at it and they love it and they love the challenge and the measurement and so on. But I chose sales. It might have taken me a little while to get there, but it was a conscious decision to do that. I had other choices as well, and it was very much something that suited my persona. But where I started from is I wanted to be a sailor. I wanted to be a professional sailor, not salesperson. And my early ambition was to sail. And when that didn't quite get me to where I wanted to get to and wasn't as successful as I wanted, I fell back on my studies, and I was interested in science. I was studying science. I loved the technology. And it was a point in time where I realized that the technology I was using to do science was more important than the science that I was doing. It was more important to me anyway. And, that was back in the emergence of the internet, the early uptake of the internet and, dare I say, email, and it was so fascinating to see what we could do with the technology. And for that, you had to be pretty smart around how you used technology and systems, and you had to be able to code as well. So when I decided it was time to move on into my career and choose a career, it was technology. And I had an easy entry point to that, having used technology so much in science for analytical devices and measurement and so on. And I was able to step into the software industry, and I was very fortunate to have a role in what was a really early stage British software company back then in the CRM space. Now, CRM didn't really exist as a term back then, but it was a great opportunity for me, and I very quickly realized that what I was best suited to in terms of personality was the early stage of engagements with customers and helping them understand what could be achieved with technology and applying the solution to a business need. And that I found very fulfilling. And I loved working with organizations, many banks at that point in time. And, I worked with such a talented bunch of technology folk and business folk and sales folk as well. And I quickly ended up doing what was technical pre-sales back then. And that was applying the technology to the need and to the proposition. And I did that for a couple of years, developed a team as well, which grew the business, helped grow the business, supported the sales team. I was very fortunate to work alongside very experienced salespeople back then. And that was my step into sales itself. And at some point, as my sales director coached me back then, he said, you've got to demonstrate you can do this yourself if you want to advance. So I took a quota carrying role in a channel at that point in time, working with a major partner. And from that was it from there on. And since then, I've worked to some degree in sales all the way through. That was kind of late 90s.
There's definitely a ring to the fact that sailing ultimately got you into sales, and analogous to lots of great salespeople, they come from professional sporting backgrounds. There's certainly something about sports and about being on the water that creates the rigor and the discipline around going into a sales-based role. And what are the transferable skill sets and the foundational things that you've taken forwards into your career from sailing?
And I think I still do every day. Really fortunate to find that as my sport, and people find other sports, but it really helped me develop decision making as one aspect. It's a complex sport, so there are technical aspects to it, there are decision making aspects to it, and it's very outcome oriented as well. There's a process, but there's also an outcome that you must meet, and that is one of the biggest characteristics of sales versus other professions. And you are trying to achieve an outcome, and it's very often a long game as well, because these are long duration events. It's not 100 meters. It's perhaps a 1 hour race. Sometimes it's offshore races as well. It's long. So, but at the end of it, there's an outcome, and there's a discipline, and there's discipline in preparation and training as well. And I think that's common across all sports, and that is why you have so many folk from a sporting background or with sporting ability in sales. It's competitive, right? You're competing against someone for the sale. It is outcome oriented, and it's very measurable.
That is a fantastic foundation to bring into sales itself, and lots of fantastic leaders I've talked to have come from alternative backgrounds. Have had lots of salespeople that have been actors, musicians, sports people, and it's the camaraderie around the team spirit that ultimately drives the outcome-focused spirit of sales itself. And I know you've done the full journey of being an individual contributor to becoming eventually a sales leader and a CRO. And I'm curious just to go back to the early days of when you started to first carry the quota, how that transition was, and also how you're able to be successful quite early on and progress up the ladder.
And I did once have a VP boss who I'm still in touch with and great terms with, and he knows who he is. And he once said to me, Mark, maybe we should get you acting lessons. And that is another facet, actually, of the sales game. It's being able to persuade, convince, present, and so on. And I've had to take training on that along the way. Moving from technical pre-sales into sales role is the biggest single step I took in my career, the single biggest step, because previously you're in demand. You're reacting, you're planning, preparing, presenting, and so on, and often taking a lead, but the opportunities are being brought to you. Once you're in sales and carrying a quota, it totally depends on you, and it has done to this day. You must initiate everything. You are there to drive a process, to start a process, to make something happen, to make judgments as to what to qualify, what not to qualify. So that was by far the biggest step in my career, and it was a very sharp learning at that time. Now, I got through it, but I could see how so many people would struggle at that very point and need the help. And I think it's great that the entry point to sales for so many nowadays is through business development and sales development, because it's much more manageable step than what I took, which was very tough, and trying to figure out, okay, how on earth am I going to open this dialogue? How am I going to take this proposition to someone? What is my proposition? So yes, acting to building business propositions and reaching customers, and that's something which stayed the same ever since. How we do that might have changed, of course.
Yeah, and there is great commercial salespeople always ride shotgun with great technical solutions engineers, and it is a great role in of itself to help the seller in those technical buyer conversations, to build conviction with CTOs, and to help demonstrate the full gravitas of a singular product, but it is a large transition going from that lane of thinking, which is largely product and technical oriented in a support role, to then going full commercial, quota carrying, as you said, kind of owning that outcome. And what do you think are the key ingredients that initially made you successful, or ones that you learned when running full cycle deals, when pushing for that outcome of getting the deal over the line?
I've worked with some amazing pre-sales folk over the years. They've all been absolutely fantastic in my career, and they know who they are as well. And I work with some super pre-sales people as well at the moment. What I think made me successful that time in the transition was a very, very clear focus. Now, that's another sporting aspect. You need to be very, very focused to the detriment of other things sometimes. And it's what you do, not what you don't do. It's the things that you do that make the difference. So it's being very single-minded about what it is you're going to do, where you're going to go, what organizations you're going to target with what proposition, and what personas you're going to target in that organization, and who you're going to try and reach specifically, and what you're going to say to them, and how you're going to get to them, and why are they going to listen to you? Why are they even going to respond to you, let alone meet you and talk to you about something? So the single biggest thing would be focus. Now that, again, is a theme all the way through from earliest stages, carrying a quota, right up to today. And while it might be one potential customer, one proposition, one persona back then, now it is, and I've done this in quite a few roles recently, it is, what's our real ICP? It's talked about a lot, but what's the real ICP? What's the ideal customer profile that we're going to approach? What verticals is it? What segment within those verticals? What markets within those verticals? And what personas within those organizations that come out are we going to target? So, but it's all focus.
Yeah, and I think ICP is often something that gets overlooked. It's a term that gets thrown around all over the business world around what truly is your customer persona. And a lot of it's in organizations is segmenting the market, putting, okay, we're targeting these job titles in these markets with these companies with certain headcounts and growth trajectories. But in reality, it's a lot more granular than what it seems from the outset. And that's at least one thing that we've learned in building Curvo, is getting really granular into what are those intent signals that derive a truly qualified ICP. And it can be driven by buyer maturity. It can be driven by where they are in their life cycle. They're a laggard in the market, are they at the forefront of innovation? There's lots of factors that go into the ICP discussion that are often overlooked. And that's what makes it 10 times harder for sellers to then go and close a deal with less qualified pipeline. In your experience, what truly defines a well-qualified persona, and how do you look past the more superficial signals?
The only thing that's as bad as not having an ICP is having a very loose ICP. And the fault that I see in many organizations is having a not undefined but too loosely defined ICP. The more focused you can make this, the better. And that's, like I said, it's vertical, it's segment. It might be FTEs in productivity type places. It's certainly the market. And then within that, it's the persona. Now, the persona is, there are lots of different terms for this in sales methodology. Economic buyer, EB, is a big one. But ultimately, it is the person who is charged with delivering an outcome in their organization. And it is the most senior person who is charged with developing that outcome. And that's going to be the sponsor at the end. If you don't get to the sponsor immediately, you've got to figure out a way to get there. You've got to know who that sponsor is. And especially for the larger end, the larger organization, the larger proposal, the larger value opportunity, it's absolutely essential. And while you might take steps there, you might have a pilot, you might have a proof of concept, you might land and expand is still a perfectly valid way of going about business and growing in the SaaS space. But you quickly need to use that to get to the key stakeholder and the sponsor.
Yeah, and that's where a lot of deals fall by the wayside, is when you don't have the EB nailed in.
It is the single biggest thing that either slows down or stops deals is not having access to that key stakeholder and that sponsor. Okay, it is always what I see through different organizations as being the reason why something is delayed, something slips, or something just doesn't happen. And it's particularly the reason why there are mismatches between what the organization thought, okay, what we believed was the process. It's always because of that.
And what would you say in a scenario where there's a deal cycle and the champion is adamant that they're going to talk to the EB without you in the room and present the business case and they have everything that they need? And this often happens within sales cycles where the champion tries to gatekeep the sponsor, and that puts a huge risk to deals. Go all the way through POC, as you said. If the sponsor's not there, then it can be one conversation outside of your control where the whole thing gets shut down. So what's your view on when champions start to gatekeep the EB, and also the best way of getting them engaged early and having them involved in the whole process so the budget side of things is going to line up?
I think the most important thing is having worked closely with the customer and having carefully developed the value of your proposition and carefully differentiated that proposition as well. And then, if it is difficult for the customer, for your counterparts to take you straight to that sponsor, okay, at least you know that the proposition will be great, the value will be clearly expressed, there will be some demonstrable proof of how that can be delivered, and there'll be a solid proposal on the table that's differentiated. If there are any other proposals on the table, if you've done a great job with this, there won't be any others on the table that go to that sponsor. So then I think if you've done that, if you've used, if you developed the insight well, if you've started this from the beginning by bringing value to the customer, by demonstrating you understand not just their business and their industry, but their challenges, and told them what they should be doing and how you can help to solve them, then it's less important if you can't get face-to-face with that sponsor. But it's a lot more likely you will if you've done that, because you will have the relationship and the trust, and you'll bring the value. You'll not be sitting at arm's length in a rigorous, RFP type process where it's anybody's guess what decision is made at the end of the day.
Yeah, this is super fascinating around getting the EB engaged, and it's exciting to hear that that's really the way to do it early on in deal cycles. And I know your insight's obviously valuable because you've gone through every rung of the ladder, from quota carrying up to sales leadership and then ultimately to CRO. And I'm curious to double down on the point in which you went from quota carrying to becoming a sales leader, and the key mindset shift that you had to adopt to ultimately lead a team as opposed to being an IC.
Yeah, and while I'd managed a pre-sales team, built up a pre-sales team and managed a pre-sales team, hired folk previously, great folk in that role, I had that little bit of management experience. But taking the step from an individual contributor in sales to managing a team, building a team, and managing a team, that was not, it wasn't something you did one day to the next. It was a process, and that's then how I developed teams, especially at Adobe subsequently. It was very much, it's not one day that you're an individual contributor, next day you're managing a team. It's a process of identifying and developing that team, perhaps having a hybrid role and being a team lead and contributing as well during that period. And at a point in time, the team is ready to scale, stepping back and building that team and augmenting that team, and perhaps stepping in when there's a gap or there's an absence in the team. That's very much how I did that. I have absolutely loved that in my career, being able to build a team and help develop folk, and it's been so fulfilling to see people step themselves from an individual contributor role into sales management, sales leadership, and broader leadership roles as well. And maybe it's something different. It's some customer success, or it's even moving to a tech sales role, for example.
And what are the key characteristics and ingredients from your perspective that make a great sales leader?
I think it's many of the things that make a great individual contributor in terms of running sales processes, but it is a broad view of the business. It's the ability to put the business and the team first and yourself last. I think that is one of the most important things. If the team is successful, as a sales manager, you're successful. It is not the other way around. And that selflessness is actually what will ensure that you succeed as a sales leader. But there are many other things. It is the people in the team. It is selecting the team well, supporting that team, targeting that team well. It is developing the team well, and it is ensuring that the goals, the structure, the focus, the cadence all support the team succeeding. And you for lots of reasons, you've got to make sure the whole team succeeds, not just a minority. And the unsuccessful periods are where you have a minority of your team succeeding and performing. And that's not good for anyone. It's not good for the team. It's not good for the business because it increases costs of the business. So much of what I've done in recent years as a CRO is about modeling that carefully and modeling the cost of sale very carefully and the productivity of the team very carefully, rationally, and ensuring that you're setting a team up for collective success.
Yeah, you touched on a really interesting point there around this disparity between top performers and those perhaps that are still trying to get to that full quota carrying number. And ultimately, it's a collective team success that drives the ultimate outcome. And to your point, it's around shrinking that gap between those outlier reps or the top performers and the ones that are potentially not hitting their number. And throughout your kind of tenure at Adobe, obviously you're there for 16 years and you had consecutive promotions and were heading up a 200 million business unit and helped, I guess, post the acquisition of Sign, which became Adobe Sign and really propelled the success of that business. Within the context of growing Adobe and this gap around top performers and the long tail of the team, what were some of the things that you put into place to help create a better equilibrium where every salesperson was succeeding?
Yeah, one of the things we did manage to do, the majority of the team succeeded the majority of the time. I think a lot of that came down to, good selection within the team, but also good focus. And we were focusing on the best opportunities within the team. So it was not about spreading the territory. It was about spreading the opportunity as best as possible and ensuring that there was a degree of focus, whether it was by vertical and there were skills that matched that vertical. And the biggest customers and prospects were effectively looked after by the team. And, if you've got one of the biggest customers that the organization has, you shouldn't have time for too much else. You shouldn't be giving that customer the same time as a much smaller or 10 much smaller organizations, for example. You've got to focus your team well. And I think that was a major part of it. It was also looking at where expansion was possible. So why did we continue to grow? It's because we cracked an issue in the UK market, first of all, and identified a gap in the UK market where the organization wasn't really performing against as compared to other markets, and we solved that. But it was also identifying new segments. It was identifying a particular segment, for example, in construction, engineering, and pursuing that with a good proposition for that sector. It was identifying the kind of mid-market, I don't mean small organizations, but a mid-market segment, identifying who could develop that and using that actually as a runway for people to develop within the team to the enterprise sector as well. But it was ensuring that the very best opportunities and prospects were effectively covered by the team.
And this whole notion around focus, I think, is absolutely critical for teams because in the advent of software, you've just got so many segments you can sell to. It can be enterprise, middle market, it can be SMBs, it can even be consumer-led, product-led growth on the long tail. I think deducing where to target and why in alignment with the market segments, thinking about the competitive differentiation, and also where truly is that white space in the market where you as an organization can go in, capitalize and deliver on obtaining a vast proportion of the TAM. All of these facets are so important in a SaaS landscape where you've got lots of players coming into the fold. I'm curious in the context of Adobe with Adobe Sign, how you'd think about the high-level strategy when choosing which market segments to approach and also how you would analyze the market to make those calls to ultimately set the team up to be as successful as they could be?
Yeah, I was really fortunate to work in that business and some other of the emerging businesses within Adobe across Europe, and it was really fulfilling. And what was the EchoSign business ultimately became the Adobe Sign business and Document Cloud business. Such fun, and I was fortunate to have fantastic people to work with, and some I worked with for many years and would so happily work with again in the future. The business was, it was early stages in Europe, and there were a lot of reasons for that. And the opportunity was there to really focus on the sectors and the requirements out there that could best be served by it. And it wasn't about spreading too thin across a whole range of industries. It was about focusing in, say, on the financial services sector, the retail financial services sector, where we could bring a lot of value. It was less so about retail, where the transaction takes place via e-commerce or over-the-counter. It was about intangible goods and regulated products, where we were most successful. And then there was the huge, internal business process opportunity as well for that business. So it was about focusing on those things. It was about identifying the opportunities, the needs, the pain points, requirements, and it was about then positioning the value of the platform to that. The other aspect was it was fiercely competitive because the market was growing very fast. It still is growing quite quickly, and therefore, the tide was lifting all boats. But there was one other major player in the market, and that was DocuSign, and remains so. And there were lots and lots of small players coming into the market all the time. But what we were doing was generally taking market share slowly, both of us, and we were invariably competing with each other in almost every opportunity. So that was a lot of fun.
And obviously, with sales being competitive sport, you win some, you lose some. How do you think sales reps optimally bounce back from the losses? Because ultimately, you're going to have a certain win rate. It might be 20%, so 1 in 4 you're going to get over the line, but 3 you might not. So how do you think about rejection and losing deals within sales, and how reps can bounce back and still be performant and optimistic?
Yeah, it's the resilience word. We've not talked about that so far, but resilience in the sales world is pretty important. But also equally important is reducing the loss rate. Now, you've got to deal with failure. You've got to accept failure, but you also need to, for all the right business reasons, you need to reduce the rate of failure and get out of things early that you're not going to succeed at, or are not going to succeed at in a timely way, because customer acquisition cost is a really, really key factor for growing businesses, especially so in SaaS. You've got to manage the customer acquisition cost. That's been a really big learning over the past 2 to 3 years for me in businesses which are, to some degree, all are, but more so resource constrained. If you don't get the economics of SaaS right in terms of customer retention and customer acquisition cost, it will never work. Okay, you can sell, but you'll be spending too much to sell, and if you don't have the retention, you can't outsell a churn rate. That's really, really important.
Yeah, the economics are vitally important, particularly in a world now where a lot of SaaS companies are heavily subsidized. We think about VCs pouring millions into infrastructure, into AI, and these huge OpenAI bills. All of it's being subsidized, but the economics still prevail. And those companies will still have to get into the point in time where they're hitting profitability targets and are optimal. But I think you touched on another important thing, which is around how you would win in deals. And obviously it must have been fiercely competitive selling against DocuSign, which ultimately has got a lot of market share over time. What were you doing to win deals at that time that would drive Adobe Sign to become the forefront?
I think there were several things, but the first was being very clear about where the opportunity was, where the white space was, if you like, and pursuing that first. And it was understanding what strengths did we have, whatever that might be, whether it was in product, whether it was in our proposition, our ability to deliver, or because they were an existing customer of Adobe in other areas, in other product fields. So there were relationships there, for example. But it was constantly working and reworking the proposition, the pricing to compete effectively, and knowing that would probably be pretty similar in many cases. So how do you differentiate that? Not through pricing, okay? Because again, there's no point selling something which is not economic for the organization either. That's not good for the customer because they're going to see prices rise. It's not good for the vendor because it's potentially going to be unprofitable and difficult to deliver. So it was about differentiating in other ways and ensuring that ultimately we could demonstrate that we really understood the need and could deliver to that need.
And I think on that framework such as value-based selling and gap selling, ultimately what drives an outcome-led sales process rather than looking at the commodity of two spreadsheets, feature-by-feature comparison of vendor X and vendor Y, which ultimately lead to the commodity layer of negotiating and haggling on price, which is the last place you want to be in a sales cycle. It needs to be a value-based conversation where you've succinctly communicated the unique differentiators, the buyer has rigged the decision criteria that only you can win, and that there's a more value-centric conversation. And what are the training approaches, I guess, that you look at with your team to try and drift their mindset into becoming more value selling rather than just relying on screen sharing demos and feature pushing in their conversations?
Yeah, we did do a great deal of value-based selling training at Adobe. It was really key. We did that for several years and we constantly iterated it. But one of the things that we established as a team in some of the emerging businesses was insight-led selling and the concept of taking a point of view to a customer. And that way delivering more value earlier on and demonstrating that you understood the customer's business and their challenges and you had a potential solution for some of those challenges. So that's the thing I'm most keen on embedding in a team. It's insight-based selling, not just value-based pitch, for example. Training that is more difficult, but it is something which, if you provide the templates, if you provide the content, you provide the examples, and you provide experience and practice for the team, you can do it. And if you build a process as well for the team to take that on and give them enough focus so that they can do it well, okay? If you do that well in a smaller number of customers, I guarantee it's going to be more successful for you and for the customers than taking a more commoditized approach to selling across a much larger customer base.
Yeah, and often this is even slowing down the number of first meetings you're taking per se, so you have the time to create that point of view and demonstrate a level of thought leadership in the industry that ultimately positions you as a consultant rather than a vendor in the conversations. And the last thing you want to be is a vendor that gets pushed off, ghosted. You want to be that consultative thought leader that has something more to share beyond the product. And I think having that POV slide when you can go into a discovery call and saying, this is what we understand about the business, this is our view on the market, and having that as a unique proprietary insight that only you as an organization can serve ultimately lends to a much more fruitful buying experience. And what's your view of, I guess, transforming reps from salespeople into becoming de facto consultants in a way and being able to lend to those conversations and share more value and wisdom beyond the product feature set?
I think it's what you do as a sales exec. Mm-hmm. It's what you do and the care you take in identifying and approaching a customer and approaching the right personas within that customer, value you bring to those personas when you do approach them. It's what you do, really. I talked a bit about insight-based selling and how you train that in the team and how you develop that, but ultimately it's what you do. Mm-hmm. Now, a little bit dubious. I've been fortunate to work with some super marketing leaders over the years and work with a super marketing team at the moment and my last couple of roles, and I've been so impressed how they can build opportunity, how they can outreach, how they can use all the tech that's available nowadays and all the channels that are available nowadays and really build engagement in the market. But increasingly that marketing based opportunity is not going to convert quickly. It's going to be long term, and what everyone's looking for increasingly is behavioral signal-based feedback from the market. And that's fascinating. What you can do with AI to identify those signals and target those signals is super. But I still don't think anything beats a really carefully crafted outreach to someone with the right proposition, round about the right time, for the right challenges that they're experiencing, and the right credibility as well as to demonstrate that you've done this for others. And then there's the referral space as well. So the referrals amongst business leaders that are your customers to your prospects is incredibly powerful.
Yeah, referrals are by far the best in terms of conversion rates and that instant credibility you go into a conversation, and largely a driver that perhaps is slightly overlooked in the advent of AI SDRs and pushing a narrative of, spamming everyone's inbox. I'm curious because you've seen 2 cycles now of, I guess you could call it the CRM revolution and then the AI revolution. And the CRM revolution in of itself was transformative with the likes of HubSpot and Salesforce setting the way in terms of having a standardized approach to managing deals and attributing that to sellers and, of course, forecasting and other benefits. And now we're seeing that second cycle, which is the AI revolution, largely driven by conversation intelligence, but also other facets around empowering human sellers to be productive and more performant than ever before. What's your perspective over the last 2 decades in seeing that first transformation and what your view now is of the second one going on?
Yeah, I think, and I've generally worked in enterprise and mid-market, and the mid-market has been a blend of reactive sales, channel sales, and proactive outreaches as well. I would say there may be 2 recent changes. One has been degree of automation and outreach from a bunch of great tech organizations who've provided the ability to build automated sequences of outreach. And as someone who receives an awful lot of these outreaches all the time, it's very obvious what is automated. And it might be effective in more of a volume business. I don't really believe in it at the enterprise level. If you're providing a complex, high-value solution, building automated sequences is not the way to go. In fact, I think it's actually a risk. And in my current role, we've stopped doing that completely. And by the way, never given any consideration to AI-based outreach so far. And from what I hear from colleagues and peers, it's not gone very well elsewhere. And when I talk to analyst companies and so on, I get the same impression that is not about to be the next big thing. In fact, there's actually a retreat away from it at the moment. Now, there are opportunities for AI to come into play to handle some of the more administrative end of things, setting up meetings, getting initial outreach. But as a profession, we need to be very careful and very considerate towards our stakeholders and our customers in this, because not get the outcome we want, but we will make it more difficult for them to identify, who can help them. The other aspect of this is in recent years, enterprise customers are becoming so much more sophisticated buyers, right? They have much more information at their fingertips. And just as consumers are starting to use AI and large language models to do some research on something rather than, a normal search engine, we're seeing enterprises use the greatly increased information that's available to them in doing research about a solution before they perhaps go to market, before they engage with a vendor at all. So what I'm seeing at the moment is a very, very big transformation. And what we've seen in the past has been more evolutionary, but I still think that too much automation in this market can be quite harmful to your prospects.
Yeah, and naturally volume decreases quality. And I think when there's such vast noise coming at prospects from all angles, email being one, LinkedIn another, when there's such noise, you end up switching off and you search for signal within that noise. You go the opposite route of where the noise is. So if the noise is an email, you take the phone seriously. If the phone's blowing up, you take conferences seriously. So I think buyers are always stepping away from the noise to get into places where there's more signal and there's more focus, because ultimately quality is king with outreach, and the other facet is, of course, timing. And this is where largely intent-based signals are coming into the fold in a much more detailed way than ever before, to understand truly when someone's in that buying position where they're looking on the market and trying to procure a solution.
Behavioral signals are very, very important. The dialers and the automated sequences can be harmful. And the signals and putting together those signals is the most important thing. You know, we've looked at inquiries to the website as being a really key aspect. We've invested heavily in our website in my current role, and that is to facilitate customers understanding what we can do for them and giving them a way to approach us and understand what we do, how we do it, who we do it for, and giving them an approach to us. The automated outreaches just won't succeed. Now, going back, say, 10 years, it typically took 5 outreaches to a customer, and that would even include customers who had actually already engaged, demonstrated interest, maybe asked for a demo. It would still take 5 approaches to reach them. That might be a couple of calls, a couple of emails, a LinkedIn message, you know, and you get a response from that. What we're seeing now is that's increasing. Okay, so we are seeing it needing more outreaches to get to a particular customer or a contact, even if it's someone who has expressed interest or is really perfectly positioned or has shown some sort of behavioral signals. And that's because of the noise. That's because of the noise that they're needing to deal with, and their need, as you say, to focus more and try and get through that noise and work in an environment that's lower noise and do the things that are most essential.
And thinking about this wider transformation and sifting through the noise to which AI can be adopted now that will drive immediate impact and future impact for sales teams. I think we've ascertained that AI outbound is questionable. It may deliver results for some, but the thesis of it around creating too much noise is, can be disproven in terms of quality. Are there any other areas of the sales stack that you're curious in exploring that you think could add more impact beyond what we've discussed?
You know, in the early stages of a sales cycle, one of the things that AI can do is a huge amount of research for you as a sales exec very quickly. It can put together a superb preparation document for you, a point of view, if you like, really rapidly. And there's some good tools out there that are starting to do that. The next stage is, okay, what can you do to support the engagement? And how can you, provide the highest quality content to your customers as well? Well, that's just something AI is absolutely superb at. And in terms of digesting large amounts of information and distilling those things down to the real essentials for both you and for the customer, AI is absolutely ideal for. And what is now clearly possible, and I've been hearing about things like this for quite a few years and been, I suppose, a little bit hesitant up to now, is the sorts of things like Curve was providing, which is the ability to support real engagement and augment the sales exec and the team in providing the best and fastest responses to a customer and ensuring that the customer gets the answers that they want and gets very high value engagement with that sales exec. I think that is absolutely a great opportunity for businesses nowadays.
Yeah, and even to the extent of improving collateral that you're sending to a customer, taking the entire life cycle of a sales process, all of the transcripts, all of the emails, all of the phone conversations, And naturally, a seller traditionally might be able to scribble down 5% of the key facts, but now you've got 100%, and you've got a large language model which is super intelligent to help decipher what's important within those key conversations and interactions, and converting those into signal to then provide a more high quality buying experience. So I actually think buying experiences are improving because proposals are getting more tailored. We're moving away from boilerplate selling where you just have a random deck that you show someone, because the barrier to entry now is reduced so much to get a good proposal and a good presentation in front of a buyer at later stages of the sales funnel.
It's really important that we reduce the noise for the buyer as well. Fortunately, they have these tools available to them as well, but anything we can use AI for that reduces the noise, improves the quality, and customizes the content better for that customer is great.
And do you have any wild bets on the future, given that there's some schools of thought right now that say AI is going to replace every salesperson on the planet, they're not going to be selling anymore? The other one's saying that's completely rubbish, salespeople are going to be augmented by AI, and then there's the other camp, which is we're not going to use AI at all. What's your take on this conundrum that's facing sellers every day and this scaremongering almost that's prevailing in front of us?
I think anyone who really confidently makes predictions at the moment is really brave. Yeah. So I look to Gartner, who would say that we're on a 5-year cycle to big transformation in the tech sales space, for example. So it's not going to happen imminently, and it will be a pathway and a process. Anecdotally, many pilots of AI are not immediately succeeding at the moment. They're maybe not set up for success quite either. There's maybe a degree of familiarization needs to take place, and people, it's a change process as well. The one thing I would say is that business remains about people and relationships ultimately. And in what I do, what my business does, you're usually asking a customer to make some degree of significant investment in a proposition and so on. And you're asking them to stake their career to some extent on that succeeding. And I really believe that a relationship of trust is needed with whoever they depend on to do that. It might be organization like mine, or it might be a systems integrator or an agency, maybe all working together for that. And it might be a number of other providers. I think that relationship will remain really key. Whatever AI we use to outreach, to help engage, to improve the quality, to improve the delivery of that, to ever optimize. That's a great opportunity for AI just to work relentlessly to improve these systems. It is going to come down to a relationship, and a relationship of trust. And it's building that trust based on the value, but ultimately it's still, I believe, going to be a human relationship at the end of the day.
Yeah, trust is the key pitfall of AI. How many people trust a GPT response?
I'd be pretty careful how I use it and cross-check absolutely everything still with anything I'm really relying upon. And I'm sure most are the same. And we all know why. It's the hallucinations and so on. But when it comes to, for example, a e-commerce platform that's looking to provide the very best search results to a consumer on a website, that's the sort of thing where AI is really going to be able to help. Okay, and already is helping our customers at the moment, for example. So, we're using AI-based search and a blend of AI and deterministic models to provide the very best results, the very best product recommendations to consumers of our major brands that are our customers. And that's something that AI does absolutely brilliantly and is ever improving at. We're using conversational search, for example, to help consumers of our brands to find what they want, to narrow down what they want. And we've some absolutely huge brands as retail customers, and they have very broad product sets, and there are so many options for the consumer that the opportunity for the brand is to provide the very best search results to them in the right order and with the right sizes, for example. And that's something which AI does really well.
Yeah, AI is going to be the new search. Perplexity is already pioneering on this particular facet. But I'm curious on your progression. So you've done all of the rungs of the sales ladder to now being at the very pinnacle of the org chart in the sales function as Chief Revenue Officer. What's changed from first line leadership to becoming a CRO in your daily roles and responsibilities, and how have you adapted?
In the first line leadership role, you are very dependent on your team, as I talked about earlier, and having the right team who are have the right skills, the right enablement, the right focus, and the right rewards. And I've not talked enough about that, but that's an essential part of the sales game. Having that is just crucial, but you're very dependent on a range of other functions in the organization. And the CRO role is responsible for several of those other functions, whether it's RevOps for planning and for ensuring smooth processes and capabilities, or whether it might be marketing as well, and ensuring that the pipeline awareness or account-based marketing is dealt with effectively. And it might be customer success as well, where you're really dependent on the customer success exec to build the relationship and perhaps even build the awareness and the case for growth of that customer. But you're certainly not going to grow any customer that isn't already happy and very successful with the platform up to that point. So that's a big difference in terms of the operation. You're responsible for that range of functions. The other aspect is really in planning, and that's been a big learning over the past 3 years. And coming from a very disciplined organization like Adobe, it certainly helps you in emerging organizations and helps you work with private equity firms that have usually a very solid methodology for this. But it's planning, it's ensuring that you set the organization up for success, that you've carefully modeled productivity, you've carefully modeled sales, customer acquisition cost, and the retention model as well, and you've got something which is cost efficient and viable. Yeah, there is some degree of subsidy in this market. It's only on the basis of success. Okay, so the subsidy is only there if you can show a path to profitability, and it's really about profitability nowadays. It's not about growth. Okay, it's not. 3 years ago, it would have been about growth. Nowadays, it's about getting to that earnings figure.
Yeah, and we're clouded by these huge numbers in growth right now. Lovable, for example, in 10 months getting to 100 million ARR. But I think it's clouded on what truly matters for sustainable business growth, which is optimizing profitability and being in it for the long run, rather than those short-term wins that look incredible. But once you get under the bonnet, you realize, okay, the economics are broken here. This can't work out in the long run. And what's your experience been on reporting the economics up to the board and having to stand before these models that you create from a planning perspective on marketing, sales, and talk through those to stakeholders that have ultimately more skin in the game and can scrutinize?
Yeah, there's no free money. And while there might have been a lot of money floating around in markets looking for investment opportunities a few years ago, there is still plenty of capital. Okay, there's plenty of capital out there, but it's not free, and it's going to go to where there is the best opportunity, the best prospects, and a lot is flowing into AI at the moment. I've really enjoyed working with the boards that I've worked with in private equity space, and their experience, the individual's experience, whether it's in terms of operating a business or whether it's as an investor working across a range of businesses, is really invaluable. And the distance that they bring to help you when you're both planning and you're operating, you're thinking about strategy as well, I really welcome that. Now, some of these discussions are very plain and very tough, and the relationships are, there's very clear expectations, okay, of what are you going to do with that investment? Is this the best investment, and literally you're working through a whole range of investment opportunities and assessing them against each other and against, how much it's going to cost, how much it's going to return, when's it going to return, what's the cash profile of that investment as well. On the other hand, your board and your investors, some of them will be trying to help you, advise you, bring their greater experience to the decisions. And the others are thinking, okay, can we put in, how much should we invest in this? Is this something, what's the timeline to the investment? What's the timeline to the exit, for example?
Yeah, I think those are all really important metrics when reporting up, and I guess to get the wisdom from the board as well and to satisfy their expectations. But yeah, interesting to see the cash profile and level of detail and objectivity that ultimately comes to deciding where to invest and why to invest.
Yeah, and my experience of not just the boards, but the advisors and the specialist teams within private equity houses is there are some exceptional people. And, part of the skill is to make the most of that and understand how to get the best from that. Sometimes it's bringing your own experience, but more often it's looking at their experience as well and getting that external view from those teams. It's a really welcome part of the role.
And we have a closing segment and remark on this show, which is to share some words of wisdom to your younger self, rewinding 2 decades that you wish you would have known at the time for those leaders that are still up and coming and still progressing in their journeys.
Always keen to support my team, my colleagues, my network, and I think it really is about relationships and network. So if I possibly can help, please do reach out to me for help, and I will not hesitate to do that with those that I've worked with or want to work with as well. I'd say some of the best advice I've had along the way has been to take some calculated risks, and that might be in terms of focus. And I've talked a lot about focus, but take some calculated risks in your career as well.
Well, Mark, thanks for joining us today. It's been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed getting to grips with your career and some of the really great highlights and strategies that you have to bear. Thanks a lot for joining us, and this will hopefully be live in a few weeks' time for the audience to see.
Thanks, Leo.
Thanks a lot.